Today, our group will be presenting on discussion about iOS versus Android for CSC520. Our group members consist of 4 members, which is FARISHA ADLINA binti JOHARI, NURIN IRDINA binti ROSLAN, NOORMUNIRAH binti MAZMAN, and also me, SHAHIRUL IKMAL bin AMAN SHAH.
Mobile operating systems such as iOS and Android are the backbone of the modern smartphones and tablets. They provide the foundation upon which applications and other features are built, and they determine how the device interacts with its user. iOS is developed by Apple is invented by the Steve Jobs. iOS is the operating system used on iPhone and iPads. It is tightly integrated with other Apple products such as Macs, Apple Watches, and iPod. On the other hand, Android, which is developed by Google, is the mobile operating system based on a modified version of the Linux kernel. Android was invented by the Andy Rubin, Rich Miner, Nick Sears, and Chris White. Android is the most widely used mobile operating system in the world. It is used on a wide variety of devices from many different manufacturers such as Samsung, LG, and OnePlus.
Okay, so now let's talk about the first aspect, which is reliability. In terms of updates, iOS is doing a better job than Android, as users will keep getting new updates as soon as it launches. Android devices, however, are not so lucky because the phone companies have to get the update from Google first and then adjust it according to their device's compatibility. This issue is considered unreliable for Android because suppose that the update is to fix all the bugs and malfunctions that their users are facing, but because of they have to adjust it first, their users might be facing a hard time while waiting for the update to be released by the smartphone companies. To add, iOS users can also enjoy the latest updates even though their devices were launched 5 or even 6 years ago. For instance, Apple had announced that their latest iOS version 16 can still be supported by iPhone 8 even though it came out 6 years ago. This is unlike Android that the updates stop after 2 to 3 years. Okay? This indicates that iOS is more reliable than Android, especially when you are planning to use your device for a long period of time. Okay, so in terms of interface and usability, iOS also has better and easy to use GUI, while Android have confusing GUI. This is because one Android user might feel awkward or unfamiliar when using another Android user's phone. This is because the sea of smartphones that use Android operating system offers a distinct graphic user interface GUI. Each company that uses Android might have a different point of view on how the app's logo should have been made and what features to include or remove. iOS, on the other hand, offers simplicity in their GUI, which makes the user's experience so much better. Apple has a detailed guide on how to develop an app UI to make the user's experience better than ever. Users don't have to figure out where to find certain features or apps when using another iOS device, as it offers the same GUI as the other one. This is what makes the iOS more reliable than Android because it is easier to use, especially for kids or older people. However, it is not always sunshine and rainbows for iOS. In terms of technology support, Android can support a wider range of technology, while iOS can support certain devices only. iOS can support foldable and dual-screen smartphones. This will give a new experience to user rather than just using a single-screen smartphone. People in business or management tend to get their hands on these foldable smartphones as it offers a wider space for them to write their notes and complete their tasks. This shows that Android is also reliable as it can help its daily tasks because it can support a wider range of technology.
And next we will be moving on with security. For any smartphone user, security should be top priority when using any mobile devices. Both operating systems, iOS and Android, use the same built-in features where it limits the damage that malware apps can do. For iOS is a closed operating system where it also provides a longer lifespan for each devices. It also impedes the inclusion of new software for users. Each function runs on a particular Unix kernel where the whole system may be affected if there is some complication from running application. iOS also prioritizes users' privacy, where all of the data of the users cannot be accessed by a third party, and iOS is more secure than Android. Next, we'll be moving on with Android security, which is Android is an open source system where it provides freedom and customization of control to the user, and it is also must be kept updated to improve the devices. And also Google mine users data for information, and Android is less secure than iOS.
So the ease of design of an operating system is a central usability concept. It refers to how simple and straightforward it is to create and modify the system's component and features. The factors included are the availability of the development tools, the level of abstraction provided by the operating system's architecture, the structure and organization of the code base. An operating system with a higher ease of design helps developers maintain and add new functionality quicker with less complexity. Generally speaking, both operating systems have a different set of guidelines to abide by while designing applications for them. Android uses a guideline called Material Design, while iOS uses a guideline called the Human Interface Guidelines, HIG. Each is maintained by Google and Apple respectively. So these platform guidelines exist to instruct app developers on what components adapting users' interfaces to use, to meet the platform's requirements and constraints, to provide the users with a seamless experiences on the devices. So when it comes to the difference of these design between Android and iOS, there are different aspects to take into account. Firstly, since Apple controls the screen sizes and devices, they also provide the templates, and this helps the developers so they can simply predict how their applications will look diversely. They don't have to think too much. Versus Android, compared to when developing applications for them, more thought must be put into it, because considering how many devices uses Android, there's a variety of screen sizes that needs to be taken into account. There are so many viewpoints designed for, therefore a large budget and a long time frame is needed to test the products. Next, the navigation when using the iOS and Android systems are significantly different and indefinitely plays a factor. While Android has an always visible bottom navigation that has functions such as to view all open apps and return to home screen or previous screen, iOS latest operating system has no home or back button. Instead, users view all open apps and return to the home screen by simply swiping up from the bottom of the screen. Another major difference that is worth taking note of is how HIG guidelines favor a flat design, while the Material Design guideline uses shadows in their designs. Next, we move on to the implementation of both operating systems. So implementation by definition is the process of writing source code in a high-level program language, compiling it into object code, and then executing this object code by means of an interpreter. When it comes to implementation of the operating design system, different approaches in terms of coding are used to develop applications in different systems. For beginners, coding an app for an iOS is relatively easier compared to Android, because Swift, the coding language that is used, is way easier compared to coding languages used to develop applications for Android, such as Java and Kotlin. Another way of implementation of iOS and Android appears to be different is that both require different budgets and maintenance tasks. Going back to the point on how different coding languages are used, Android apps are coded in a more difficult language, therefore their maintenance and development tend to be more expensive compared to iOS, which is built using the Swift language, which has been built to be robust and an intuitive programming language created uniquely just for Apple applications, which therefore uses a lower budget. To elaborate on the issues when it comes to decoding, developers tend to face the issue of fragmentation. Fragmentation is a diversity of devices, browsers, and platforms versions in use at any given point in time. This has to be taken into account since, like we've already discussed, Android has a lot of variety of devices, therefore more fragmentation is needed, versus iOS that leaves less fragmentation. The core features of the operating system appears to be uniform, as the intention was indeed to create a cohesive user experience for the iOS compared to the Android.
Next, we will be moving on to the flexibility aspects. In the smartphone users community, Android is famously known as a flexible and highly customizable operating system, as it allows its user to choose on how they want to set things up. iOS, on the other hand, is known as a less flexible operating system. The flexibility of Android is not only limited in choosing what apps we wish to open a URL in, but rather than using another operating system in it. To illustrate, we can emulate apps that is powered by Windows operating system on some Android tablets that have x86-based chipsets in it. Not only that, Android devices such as the Google Pixel C can also do some tasks of a laptop just by using a full keyboard and a USB Type-C port. According to Brian Bassett in 2019, who is a senior research analyst at IDC, iOS only comes in one flavor only because its source code cannot be customized. This alone is not an issue, as we can still complete our daily tasks using the default iOS, but in certain situations, we need an operating system that can be modified based on our desired needs. Mobile app development is also hard for iOS because most of the frameworks that can be used to ease the development process are licensed, and paying for it will increase the development cost. Android, on the other hand, once again wins the flexibility debate as it is an open source software where developers can play around with the functionality of various crowdsourcing frameworks and plugins. This allows them to improve the software by adding desired features and modify the source code according to their objective, something that we don't see in iOS. Therefore, it is safe to say that Android is more flexible than iOS.
So for the next point is efficiency between iOS and Android. There will never come to a point where both of these operating systems wins the argument. Although recent studies found that iOS are way more faster and more efficient than Android, specifically memory handling. For instance, an Android device with 2 GB RAM fails to give smoothness of the devices compared to iOS with 1 GB RAM. This is because iOS focus more towards optimizing the devices rather than building more specs for the users. As mentioned earlier, iOS is a closed ecosystem that is made for compact integration, so iOS does not need to have higher specifications to compete with Android. Next, iOS has better improvement regarding their software than Android because iOS will keep the system updated frequently. However, iOS also have its weaknesses, where this also might not be a good news for iOS user, as older devices might not get the latest update as the devices no longer supports the update. For Android, it have many manufacturers, so the updating procedure might be late, sometimes months for the user to get the latest updates. But corporations like Samsung and Sony might have problems to efficiently optimizing their devices. At last, as we all know, the latest version of Android will allow the users to have the right to control their smartphone connecting to the smart TVs. Meanwhile, iOS only support Apple TV. Android optimization may be vary from different manufacturers, as you can see, and it has worse optimization because it takes time, and the devices also become slower after 2 to 3 years compared to iOS, which is they still can be used after 5 years.
Next, we moving on to the advantages and disadvantages of iOS and Android. For iOS, the first advantage is that the iOS provides high security. It helps to protect users' personal and sensitive data, and also helps to prevent malicious software from running on the device. Because iOS prohibits using websites or applications from the third-party apps to download additional apps, there is the less chance that viruses can infect devices, harm data, or even steal users' sensitive information. The second advantage is that the seamless interaction with other iOS devices. The Apple ecosystem of devices and services is designed to work seamlessly together, which make it easy for users to share data and fast across multiple devices. All these seamless interaction features make it very convenient for users because they boost productivity and efficiency. Lastly, iOS has a consistent user interface across all iOS devices. It helps users quickly adapt to different devices and still have a familiar and comfortable experience, making it more efficient for users to switch between different iOS and devices. The first disadvantage of iOS is the high cost. This can be a significant barrier for many people, particularly those in the economically poorer sector of society. This can make it difficult for them to afford the latest iOS devices or apps, which can limit their access to the platform's benefits, such as access to the latest apps and the features. Next, iOS is not an open source platform. The source code is not freely available and can only be accessed and modified by the authorized developers. This limits the ability of developers to modify and customize the operating system, as well as the ability of the end users to modify and customize their devices. iOS devices have another disadvantage, which is their limited storage capacity. iOS does not support SD card and cannot expand the memory of devices. This can be a problem for users who need to store large amounts of data, as well as with some apps and games requiring large storage space. Some users may have to delete apps, photos, and video to free up space and purchase additional storage via iCloud. Next is the advantages and disadvantages of Android. The first advantage of Android is an open source platform. This means the Android operating system enables change to the core software of the operating system to be made by developers and hardware manufacturers. This allows for the third-party development and innovation, leading to the new and exciting features and apps. Another advantage of Android is the cost of device. Due to the affordable price range, most users prefer to purchase Android devices. As a result, this made Android more accessible to a wider range of users. Besides that, Android is an open ecosystem where the operating system can be run on any mobile device, and users can install any apps. Android gives users the option to download apps from the other app store. Apps can be downloaded directly from the developer's website or via a third-party app store. However, there are also some disadvantages to consider with Android. One of the disadvantages is the fragmentation of the operating system across different devices and versions. This can make it difficult for developers to ensure the apps work seamlessly on all devices, as different versions of devices may have different capabilities and limitations. Next is the inconsistent user experience across different devices and versions of software. Because there are so many different devices and manufacturers using the Android operating system, users may have different experience depending on the device they are using. This can cause confusion and frustration, as users must adjust to a different ways of interacting with the same or the similar products. Another disadvantage is the security vulnerabilities in the software or operating system. It is very easy for hackers to install malware and gain authorized access to an Android device, and then steal personal information and even control the device remotely. This can make you more susceptible to malware and hacking, which can put user personal information at risk. This might lead to a serious consequence such as identity theft, financial losses, and the other negative impacts. So, in conclusion, iOS and Android have their own unique features and strengths. So the choice between these two often depends on the people's personal preference and the specific features of devices.
With that, that's all from us and thank you.